Hello friends, in the last video we have created an additional domain controller in a domain that is gogreen.com, and in this video we will see what are Fsmo roles, and it is also called as a Fsmo roles. So what make a DC different with a ADC? Like if you see the both DC, they are a domain controller. It's a main domain controller, that is a primary domain controller, and it's an additional domain controller. They both are replicating with each other. That means if a DC goes offline, the user can still authenticate with the DC. So and they are working as in a load balancing way, and they are in active mode for each other. They are in active mode, but there are some operation for which they both are not active, which means if DC goes offline for 2 or 4 5 10 minutes, that means nothing will happen to your environment. Like nobody will knows what happens, because ADC will be authenticating all the users. But if a DC go offline for a long period of a time, that means you will be in a problem. There are few tasks. If you see, there are few tasks which DC can perform but ADC cannot perform. There are some roles. There are 5 roles we will discuss in the next slide. There are 5 roles which is residing inside a DC, and for those roles a DC is only an active domain controller and ADC is in inactive state. For the authentication purpose, ADC and DC, they both are active, but there are some roles for which only a DC is in an active state and the ADC is in a inactive state. That is operation roles, like operation master. Right now our domain controller is only a operation master and ADC is not a operation master. So if our DC goes offline for a long period of a time, that means, and in that time we requires those roles, that means the ADC is in inactive state, we cannot perform those tasks without domain controller. That's why the both are required. And if you want, like if you got to know that my DC is not able to come back, or DC is dead, that means at that time all the roles from the DC, the inactive role in a ADC, the 5 roles, the DC has a 5 roles, ADC also has a 5 roles, but that are inactive state. And if DC goes down, or if a disaster comes to a DC and it's not it cannot bring back again, at that time we have to seize a role in ADC and we will make it as a primary domain controller, and it will work as a primary domain controller. So let's see what are those roles. There are 5 roles, 5 Fsmo roles, that is flexible single master operation roles. The first one is Schema Master, that is a forest wide role. Another is domain naming master, that is also a forest wide. And third is read master, it's a domain wide role. PDC Emulator, domain wide role. And infrastructure master, domain wide role. So let's see what does that mean, like forest wide and domain wide. Let's see the example. Suppose when first forest is created, like if you in an Active Directory environment, when you install Active Directory and DNS in a first computer, like you want to make a computer as a domain controller, when a domain is created, when the first domain is created, then forest is already itself created. That means you have to select at that time add a new domain in a new forest. That means we are creating this domain, and if you see this, this is a forest. This is already created with the first domain. And let's suppose if we create a child domain under this domain controller, it's a tree structure, but still it is inside the forest. When a domain is created, then then three roles are created: the PDC Emulator, Infrastructure Master, and Read Master. And when the first domain is created, that means this domain has three roles. And when the first domain has a three roles and the forest is also created, that means it has the forest wide role as well, the schema master and domain name master. So this first DC has all the five roles. And now the second, we have created a child domain controller. At this time we select the option a new domain in a existing forest. That means this is our forest, this is our existing forest, and now the only domain is created. We haven't created a forest. Like if the domain is created, only three roles are created on this. And the first domain controller, there are five roles, and in only a domain controller there are only three roles. If we create a new child domain with this domain, a new domain is created, then again now the domain is created, not a forest is created, because we are creating a new domain in a single forest. Inside a forest, a domain is created, only three roles will be there inside a domain. You can make it simple, like if a domain is created, then three roles are created. When forest is created, then two roles are created. And if you see, if you create a first DC, then at that time you create a domain and forest, both the things. That means in the first DC, when it is created, all the five roles will be there inside. All the five roles will be there. And you can keep these roles, you can assign these roles, you can transfer these roles. If you have one more, like if you have another domain controller, that is additional domain controller, you can transfer the, if you have a five role in this domain controller and you have additional domain controller here, you can transfer two roles, three roles, and accordingly you can transfer the role to each other. But in the default situation, the first DC has five roles, and if there's a domain controller inside your organization and you haven't transferred the role, it will have a role, but it will be in inactive state. That means if this DC goes down, you can just seize a role in this DC. All the five roles, you have to seize those roles to the additional domain controller and make it primary. And make sure that role you can also transfer the role when the DC and ADC are live. That means they are online, you can transfer the role at that time. But if a DC is dead, at that time you have to seize a role on the additional domain controller. And if in a case somehow you bring this back, like there was a fault with the motherboard and you said you thought like it will not come back again, and you seize a role inside this ADC, and anyhow the board was repaired and you brought it back. That means once you seize the role inside your ADC, you should not bring it online, because it can create a heavy damage to the whole Active Directory infrastructure. Once you seize the role, you have to just eliminate this domain controller from your network. What you can do, you can add a new domain controller. You as this will be a primary domain controller, you can add a new additional domain controller to this, but you cannot bring it back again, because there cannot be a two domain controller holding all the five roles. So let's jump to the next slide. What is Schema Master? The first role is Schema Master, that is, you see here, that is a forest wide role. That means the Schema Master holds a Schema Master role holder is a DC responsible for performing updates to the directory schema. You can, that is a name context. You can delete this thing. You can just keep it like that. It is responsible to perform the update to the directory schema. I'll show you what is this, what is that. And this is only that can process update to the directory schema. Once the schema update is complete, it is replicated from the Schema Master to all the DC. Only the DC holding a Schema Master role can update this schema, and once it is updated on a DC, then it is replicated to all domain controllers in a forest. To register a command, you cannot see this without registering this command to PowerShell. We will just register this command to our PowerShell and we will see what is Schema Master. So let's go to the computer. Let me unlock it. This is our main domain controller, that is a primary domain controller, that is gogreen.com. So let's go to the PowerShell and type the command reg svr32 chmmgmt.dll. See the we got the option like it is registered successfully. So let's go to the MMC and add remove snap-in. Now you will see Active Directory schema here. If you will not register that command, you will not see the Active Directory schema here. I'll say add. Okay. It holds the classes and objects. It holds the classes and attributes. And if you see, if I'll show you what that means. If you have a user in computers, and let's go to the properties of a user, you can see we have a attributes here like first name, last name, display description of. If you want to add some another field here, another attributes here, you can do it by you can extend the schema by this Schema Master. If you see the properties here, attributes, so these are, you can see some default one there, but all are not there. If suppose in an Active Directory you want something else here, like you have an office description, display and email, you want some you have a coloring with the, like you have a group in your organization, divided them in a colors like yellow, green or blue, and you want them to be here appear as a yellow, green or blue, and you want to just drop down and select the yellow, green, you have to extend the schema. But it is not done in a simple way. You should have a proper developer who can just edit the Schema Master. So this is a Schema Master, and it holds the classes and attribute. It means, you can say that it holds a kind of a structure of a object. It holds a structure of an object, like what should be there and what can be extended, or if you want to extend it in a custom way, you can extend it. So let's come back to the slide. Now we have a Schema Master is there. Now let's go to the domain naming master. What does that means? The domain name master Fsmo role holder is the DC responsible for making changes to the forest wide domain namespace of the directory. This DC is only one that can add or remove a domain from a directory. It can also add or remove cross-reference to the domain in external directories. That means if you want to add, you have a ADC. Let me put the name here, that is DC, and this is ADC. If you want to create a new domain in your environment, let's take example like you have both DC and ADC in your environment, and DC is down and no domain is added in your Active Directory organization. That means you will not get any problem, or you will not face any error until you join a new domain. Like if you want to join a new domain and our DC is down, that means we cannot join this domain as a new domain or as a child domain to our forest, because it's a forest wide role. It's not a domain wide role, it's a forest wide role, and you cannot join a new domain in your existing forest. That's why the domain naming master is required. It is used to join the domain in Active Directory forest, and it is also used to remove the domain from the forest. I hope you get the point. That means we cannot join a domain without this role. And suppose if you transfer the role, only a DNM role has been transferred to this, and you perform this task, yes, you can perform the task. And or the schema master, if you don't want to install, like you don't want to extend the schema, whenever you install your Exchange environment, you install an Exchange server in your Active Directory environment. At that time, Active Directory needs to be extend the schema. That means all the domain controller, this one, all the child domain and the other domain controller holds the same schema, same classes and attributes. If you want to install Exchange, that means the schema has to be extended on the domain controller, and it will be replicated to all the DCs, and there will be a same schema running and in the entire forest. That's why it is a forest wide role. And the domain name master is also a forest wide role, because if you want to create a new domain in your forest, like you want to add a CDC, you want to add a tree domain, you cannot do it without a domain naming master. So let's move to another, the read master Fsmo roles. This is a domain wide role. The read master roles is responsible for processing RID pool requests from all DCs within a given domain. It is also responsible for removing an object from its domain and putting it in another domain during an object move. And it also attaches a unique security ID to an object DC in a domain in a allocated pool or read. And let's see what does that mean. Suppose you have, let me delete this now. Let's take this one. We have a DC and ADC. That means the SID pool means when they are working in it together in an environment. That means once it is added as a domain controller, that is an additional domain controller, it assign a pool, a SID pool to this additional domain controller. That means if you want, if this is down and this user want administrator want to create a user, he can create a user in this ADC. Though it is down, your main DC is down, he can create a user inside this and it will be authenticated. That means user can be created because it assign a pool of a 500 example. It give once it is attached with it, it gives a pool, like it gives a 500 seed pool to it and says like you can create a 500 object by yourself. So once the administrator will go in a additional domain controller and it is a DC is down for a while, you can just create the user inside it, and then once the 500 users are completed, like you created a 500 users, till then you will not face any problem. But once the 500 users, you have created 500 users, after that what happens, this ADC says to a DC, I have completed, my pool is finished. It requests a new pool to a DC and it says okay, your pool is finished, I'll provide you next 500 pool, next pool of 500 ID, so that you can create next 500. So once it is finished, like 500 pools are finished, you have created a 500 user in this ADC and this is down at that time, and you want to create a user that is the number 501, like 501. At that time you cannot create a user, you will find a problem with creating a user. So that's why these roles are required. So though you can transfer these roles as well, but right now we are considering it as all the roles in our main domain controller, that is DC01. And it also assign a unique SID. That means user, if you have a user, the two user with the same name, so how the Active Directory identify them, they assign a SID, object SID is assigned to a particular user. So the directory, Active Directory communicate, they do not communicate with the name, they communicate with the SID of an object. So how it looks like, I will show you. If we go to the domain controller and I'll just minimize. If you go to the Active Directory user and computer, you cannot see the SID there. If you see the advanced option, you can see the other thing here, and if you see the advanced option and you go to the user setting, you can see the attribute editor here. And you can see the object SID. You see here, this is how it looks like. The object SID will look like this thing. It assign a object ID. That means it's a work of a read pool master. Because if you do it in a normal way, you cannot see that. I have just selected the advanced feature, that's why I have been able to see that, because by default if you see it as a branch user, you just click on a properties. See here, the properties, the tabs are not there. You don't have that much of tab inside it now, and you don't have attribute editor here. And that's why I told you that you cannot see in it this way. You just have to do a view and you have to click on advanced feature, and now the advanced feature is there. Now you can go to the properties of a user, and now you have the attribute editor here, and you can just select the SID. There's an object SID here and object GUID is here. I hope you get the point. Like, this is the work of a read pool master. It assign a pool of a ID to a additional domain controller, and also assign a SID to an object. Let's move to the another slide. Now comes with the PDC emulator. What is PDC emulator? It is necessary to synchronize time in an enterprise, and password change performed by the other DCs in the domain are replicated preferentially to the PDC emulator, and all the account lockout is processed on the PDC emulator. That means if we go to the same one, it basically what it does, if a user changes their password and we have 2 or 3 or more users who changes the password regularly and they have changed the password, that means the role, the PDC emulator role I have in a DC, that means once the password is changed, it will inform to a PDC and emulator. PDC emulator will get to know like the password has been changed, and then it will replicate to a DC. And once it is replicated, after that if the DC is down, that means the user comes and try to log in, it will be authenticated via ADC. That means the password was replicated. But suppose if a computer is joined, let me take this one, if a computer is joined with this as a primary domain controller, like the DNS of a computer is joined as a primary domain controller as a ADC, and the password has been changed, so that it will go to the, still it will go to the DC, because the PDC emulator is here, and the PDC emulator will then tell the ADC that this user changed the password. So if you have like multiple group or branches in your office, and some branch like you know the third branch or fourth branch changes the password very often, they changes their password very quickly, like within 2 or 3 days they used to change the password, and there are like 40 to 50 users, and they are trying to change their password on a regular basis. So at that point, and suppose this is a group which changes the password regularly within a day or 2 days, that means, and these two computers, or there can be multiple computers, are joined as a primary as a ADC, primary with the ADC, you can put the PDC emulator role, you can transfer the PDC emulator role on this ADC, because here the password is getting changed very quickly. So that means once it is changed, it will inform it is the nearest point for them, it will inform it, and then PDC will replicate it to the DC, but the main role will be on a PDC, on a additional domain controller. So these were the 5 roles, and if we see now in this one, this is a root domain. This is a root domain, because if you think it like that, consider only this domain where I'm pointing, that is abc.com. when this domain is created, that means a blue color circle, the forest is already created at that time. That means all the 5 roles are created, and they are kept in a root domain name, that is abc.com. and now we try to create a child domain. That means which role helped us to create a child domain? A DNM, the domain name master, helped us to create a child domain name. Okay, we also created another child domain name, but the domain is created, it is a new domain. That means 3 roles, like it will hold its own 3 roles, that will be like PDC emulator, RID master, and the third role will be infrastructure master. Sorry, I forget to tell you about the infrastructure master, because last was the PDC. So what is infrastructure master role? It is responsible to update an object SID and distinguish name in a cross-domain object. Infrastructure master role should be held by a domain controller that is not a global catalog. Okay, let's go. Suppose you have this different domain and user want to log into this domain because as it's inside a forest, in a same forest, that means they will have a transitive trust between them and this user can log into them. At that time the infrastructure master is a role which will perform a check on the object, like this object is from this domain and want to log into this domain, and it will allow. At that time the infrastructure master role will work to identify the object through the cross domains. So now when the root DC is created, that means 5 roles are created. That means all the 5 roles are inside it. But when a domain is created, that means 3 roles like PDC Emulator, read master and infrastructure master. This domain will have its own 3 roles, and the child domain under it will have all 3 roles. This domain will also have 3 roles. This will also have 3 roles, but it will have its 3 roles plus the forest wide role. That means the 2 roles, that is our schema master and domain name master, will be held by this root DC, and it's an entire forest. It is for entire forest. That means the joining a domain, removing a domain, the domain name master will work from this DC. And if you want to extend the schema, if you want to install Exchange server on this organization or in this forest, that means a schema need to be extend on this domain controller, which will extend the schema to all the domain controller because they are holding a single schema. That means they are holding a common schema throughout the forest. And same way, this is a forest 2, this is a root domain here, and it has when this domain is created, the forest is created, and when the another domain is created, at that time forest is not created because it's already created when the first domain is created. Now the only the 3 roles are created inside this domain. So it's a simple, when domain is created, 3 roles are created. When a first domain controller is created, the 3 roles for a domains are created, and as it is a first domain controller, that means forest is created, that means 2 roles are also created. So first DC will have all the roles, that all the 5 roles will be on the first domain controller. And the one thing is that infrastructure master role should not be placed on a global catalog server, because global catalog server already have a partial information of all the object in the entire forest. So it will not update your other object, because once we are logging to a cross domain, the object needs to be updated. So this is an important point, to not to put a infrastructure master role on a global catalog server. So in next video we will see how to transfer these roles. Let's see the roles, how we can check the roles. If you go to the Active Directory users and computer, and you just click change domain controller, and let's select the DC. Okay, and I select operation master. Right now it is showing me the domain wide role, and we have a DC01 as an operation master for our read, and a PDC, you can see the operation master is the same, and the infrastructure master, you can see 3 roles from Active Directory users and computer by just right clicking and checking on operation master. Let's move to the Active Directory trust, domain and trust, and here if you see, right click and see the operation master. Here you can see the domain naming operation master, ensure that domain so are unique. That means this domain naming operation master is also this computer. Though you can change, if you right now we are on a DC01, you should go to a DC on a ADC and you can just click on change, because right now it says the current active directory domain is serving as the operation master. To transfer the operation master role to a different computer, you must first connect to it. That means you have to connect to it. You have to go to another domain controller, and you can select the change, and then you can select the domain name to which you want to transfer this role, and it will be changed. This can be done while both the computers are online, like both the domain controllers are online. But once your DC is crashed, like main computer is crashed, then we have to seize the role. So in the next video we will see how to transfer the roles and how to seize the roles. And if you want to see the another here, let me go to MMC. Add, let me add the active directory schema. Okay, now from here you can see the operation master. This is a schema master, change schema master. These are the graphical way you can try to change you can transfer this role to another server. Like this is schema master. I show you the schema master, domain name master, RAID, PID, and infrastructure master. How you can change this role? You have to go to the another domain controller like your ADC. So in the next video we will see how to transfer the roles, and also we will try to seize a role on a ADC. Thank you for watching, and you can subscribe for more videos.